Sabbe satta bhavantu sukhitatta. May everyone find their existential bliss. So we have been continuing our corona-related issue discussion series. During the last few weeks, we have been discussing about the issues related to corona, but more towards compulsion. And today, we are going to look at a new dimension of these corona-related issues. Issues like uncertainty, fear of sickness and death, fear of losing your income, fear of losing your ways, your usual ways of living. So we are going to discuss what is behind the fear component of the corona-related issues or COVID-related issues. So before going there, let me ask you a question. What do you think about fear? Is it risk, or is fear something different altogether? Is really fear always necessarily related to the risk that we take? So for example, I have been, before I became a monk, I was involved with the outbound training activities. And there's this place in Sri Lanka called Kitulgala, and there are these activities where you jump off a rock or jump off a cliff to a natural pool of water. So I have seen that whenever we carry out this type of outbound activities, that sometimes people are so afraid to jump. The pool is about 10 to 30 feet high sometimes, but people are very afraid to jump off this rock. And to see that they are wearing a life jacket and there's lifesavers down there, their colleagues are jumping, but sometimes, regardless of the risk it poses to you, you're afraid of doing that. And I have been also been involved in many adventure activities like surfing, rock climbing, whitewater rafting, kayaking, etc., etc. And let me take a spot like surfing, for example. Now we are on the sea on a surfboard, and your leg is sort of tethered to the surfing board, so that in case you have fallen off the board, you can still grab the board. And you go to the sea and then you start doing your surf, and to see that even if you're not a good swimmer, for example, I'm not a good swimmer, but it doesn't make you a bad surfer. And if you have the fear factor, it might block you from surfing, but you necessarily doesn't have to be a good swimmer. Not necessarily. You need to swim a little, but you don't need to be an expert swimmer. And to see that sometimes fear might not necessarily relate to the risk it poses. But having said that, of course, this type of adventure activities has their own pluses and minuses. For example, I remember one time when we were doing an activity on a zip line. A friend of mine, she fell off about 30 feet, and then she broke her leg. The bone came out. It was a compound fracture. And myself, I have been close to death quite a few times. For example, one time in Phuket, Thailand, I was trying to surf, but then I couldn't. So I was without the board, and then I got carried out by a riptide. So when you get caught into a riptide, you get dragged away to the ocean really fast, and in a blink of a second, you see the shore is really small, and all the people are so far away. So I got saved by me and another person got saved by a jet ski. So similarly, Nusa Dua, Indonesia, I was trying to surf. That was above my limitation, and there was a huge swell which I couldn't really do anything about. So I know what these threats, the adventure activities poses also, and I also understand the fear factor of that. But asking you the question again, is the fear and risk are similar, or are they two different things? Now, if you look at it, we might say risk is more statistical. You know, there's a probability of risk happening, and you can even calculate risk. But something like fear, it's not very statistical, but it's something that you feel. It's something that you feel, and your feelings can be rational or can be irrational also. But before going there, let me show you, if we want to calculate risk, there are different various methods that we could calculate risk. For example, if you want to calculate your risk, what you can do is you can plot a graph based on the impact or the consequences of that particular risk, what type of an impact it would have. For example, there could be minor risks, moderate and severe. And at the same time, you can plot the other side of the graph, the other axis, which is the likelihood or the probability of something happening. So it could be a rare possibility to moderate or to a certainly happening possibility. And if you plot a graph or make a matrix between these two axes, the impact it would have and the likelihood it would have, you would have something like this. So the green color square, which is on the bottom left, let's say that there's a house ant, and it depends totally on from where you're talking. If you're in a ant infested area, there will be many ants. But let's take Colombo, Sri Lanka. In my temple, we don't have many ants, and even if one of those ants bite, I don't know, they rarely bite, and even if they bite, I don't think it will be a major issue. So it again depends on the person. If you are particularly allergic to ants, it would be an issue. So if an ant bites me, the impact is really minor, and the occurrence of ant biting me is really rare. If you move one column right to the right side column, which is in the middle, let's take a dog. Now, dog biting me is also kind of rare. If I got bitten by a dog, the impact would be a little more than getting bitten by an ant. Let's move one more column to the right to the severe impact. Now, I was talking about this previous monastery I was staying, and there are elephants. Now, of course, you know, elephant hitting you is much more severe than a dog biting you. So you see that your risk can be plotted between ant, dog to elephant. They pose different types of impact, or the consequences of that happening will impact you differently. So some might be critical, catastrophic, some might be minor that you don't even have to be bothered about. At the same time, it could be something rare. The occurrence of that happening is quite unlikely. For example, if you're in Canada, you are getting hit by an elephant is quite rare because you don't have wild elephants. And unless if you are working in a zoo in the pit of the elephant, or the cage of the near the cage of the elephant, it's really unlikely. So you see that you can also calculate risk this way, that there's likelihood of something happening, and there's the consequences or the effect that that particular risk poses to you. And why do I say this? Now, there's a common saying that planes are much more safer than cars. Now, how does that happen? They say that one in 11 million, once in 11 million, a plane, a passenger who's traveling on a plane could get into an accident. It could be fatal. And if you're driving a car, it could be one in 5,000 times. So every 5,001 person who's driving a car might get into an accident, statistically speaking. Now, there are issues with statistics, of course. Not all the people fly on planes, and not all the people, most of the people go on cars, but not all the people go on planes. So there's a particular higher risk for the people who are traveling on a plane. And at the same time, you can say that there's less plane frequency than the vehicle, the automobiles, the land vehicles. But if you compensate to those factors and still look at the statistics, which is not perfect, but just to get an idea that a plane accident is 1 in 11 million and a car accident is 1 in 5,000. But what I want you to understand is that regardless of the calculated risk a plane or a car would have, or an accident of a plane or a car would have, the impact of fear or the feeling that you get on board a plane and when it's taking off versus you getting on board and driving off to school or to work. Now, those are not the same. And of course, that another way to look at it is that how many people that you personally know had died or got injured from a plane crash, or how many people you know got injured or died through a car crash. You will of course see that there's many people that you know got somehow affected by a car crash, but there's almost none that we personally know who got affected by a plane crash. So you see that in general, we could conclude that planes are safer, statistically speaking. But it does not mean that the amount of fear you have towards riding a plane is anything lesser. So, having said that, let me take some examples from Canada about the diseases we have. Now, of course, I took this detail from the Statistics Canada website. And I wasn't too keen on doing a good comparison, so I took the figures from 2018, and I also plugged in the figures I took from 2024 COVID-related deaths. So if you see in Canada, in total in 2018. 80,000 has died due to cancer. Now, malignant neoplasms is the fancy word that the doctors used for cancer. So cancer has killed 80,000 people. Heart diseases killed 52,000 people. And corona up to now has killed about 13,800 people. Maybe it's a little high right now. So if you also calculate the average deaths per day, basically simple maths, 80,000 divided by 365 days, you will see that cancer or heart kills more people than people getting killed by corona, COVID. Uh, I think the last time I checked, it wasn't 48 people per day, deaths per day. It was about 116. So it goes up and down. There was a peak. At the peak, probably it was higher. And there was a off peak where it was a little lower. But if you generally try to even it out, you will see that roughly about 50 people are dying because of COVID. And about 6 times more would die because of cancer, and 4 times more would die because of heart attack. Now, what I want you to understand is that although we see this in statistics, and by any mean, I'm not saying that a corona or doing an outbound adventurous activity is safe. What I'm trying to say, and what I want you to reflect, is the feeling or the fear that it have in your mind versus the other fear factors, or versus the other risk factors rather. So you see that the fear doesn't necessarily respond to the risk or the calculated risk. If you look at it, I'll give another example. About 2.8 million Americans die every year. And if you ask how many died because of terrorist related activities in America, you would say, well, terrorism is a big issue. Like, it could, a bomb could go off, there could be some activity. So terrorism is an activity, both domestic and outside in America. From 2000 onwards up to now, roughly about 25,000 Americans got killed due to terrorist activities. And if you look at the number of people who got killed within America, that's about 3,300 people, including the 9/11. So 2.8 million Americans die each year, but 3,000 people have been dead for the last 10 years, or for the last 20 years rather, due to terrorist related activities. But if you ask an average person, are you afraid of dying or are you afraid of terrorism more? You would see that the answer is that terrorism is more significant than just dying. So what I want you to understand is that our mind doesn't perceive the calculated risk as it is, but it perceives a fear. So fear, you could say, is very, very psychological, and risk, of course, is a statistical measurement. Now, you also see that when Corona was new, people were more afraid to it. But as time moves on, as time passes, they get used to it. And 5 years down the line, if you ask, Corona would be just normal as influenza. But right now, or 5 months ago, 6 months ago, we were more afraid of Corona. So there's sort of a desensitization also happening if the risk is posed daily to you, or if you have to live with it. There's even a saying that the known devil is better than the unknown angel. So we get used to the known threats or known fears, and we sort of desensitize versus the risks that we don't know about. If you again look at the issues about another pandemic like HIV/AIDS. Now, HIV/AIDS has been spreading throughout through the world since the early 1900s, but no one knew. No one absolutely knew if there was even a disease called AIDS, and it spread. The pandemic kept going from one place to the other, from Africa to Haiti, etc., etc. And around 1980, when people got more symptoms, and when they were more vigilant about it, or when they were more aware about it, they started panicking about AIDS. But now that you have lived with AIDS for so long, people don't look at it as a serious issue at all. They are not very afraid of it. People would be more afraid of corona right now than they are afraid of AIDS. Well, of course, you could say the medical sciences has advanced, and there's medication available now for these things. So you can look at it that way also. But again, what I want you to understand is, do we perceive fear proportional to risk, or is it something different? Now we know that it's not necessarily the calculated mathematical or statistical risk that we are talking about, that fear is different. But now let's look at what causes these fears. So if you see that fear is very much related to the information we receive. For example, when you listen to news, you started becoming aware and becoming afraid of things more than if you haven't. For example, take the pandemic COVID. Now they say that Corona has been spreading even before 2019 end, like I don't know the exact date, but say September, October. And no one knew, even until January, only some people knew, and no one was afraid of that particular disease. And I'm sure that in Canada, in Italy, in Iran, there were some people already dying because of that during the early parts of this year. However, you don't necessarily respond to it as a fear until a lot of people are afraid of it. Or in another way, that once you started receiving the information about these risks, you started getting afraid more. You can also see that the I wouldn't even say it a problem. I'm just trying to propose it to you as it is, or show it to you as it is. More information you have, you can be manipulated also in different manners. There's this very nice documentary on Netflix called The Social Dilemma. It's about how you get manipulated with the data that you receive on your Facebook, on your WhatsApp, on your YouTube. Even though you think that you have the free will to search anything on YouTube, it is not the case all the time. You are given a particular search, or a list of results that would most fit you based on what the social media network companies think which would best suit you. So you see that the thing with information, that information can be manipulated. And mind you, before I became a monk again, I was involved with a very famous brand, and I was in the marketing team. So there's this brand strategy that each brand carries out. So if you want to establish a brand in a person, they look at two things. That one is the points of interaction. Are you checking it on TV, on radio, on the billboards, on the signages, at the particular shop, at the counter level? Where would you come across that? And then the next factor is in what frequency. So if it's an advertisement on television, that you could have it in, if you have 5 channels available in that country, you could have it in all the 5 channels, and you could have the same 5 channels running the same advertisement for 100 times per day. So based on these two factors, the points of interaction and the frequency, marketers know that you can manipulate people easily. So they can promote their product, promote their message, and makes you believe in anything that you would like. Politicians do the same thing. If they want to propagate an idea, what they have to do is to think of all the interaction points a person would come across, or a particular market segment would come across. For example, if you take a kid, he would be mostly interacting around the school. So whatever around the school would prime the kid. And if you're an adult, if you're an adult who's working in a hospital, so you can be very specific. You would be getting exposed to more disease related or more hospital related information. So that is where you could get influence. So in a way, the marketeers are actually psychologists. They know how people work, how the mind works, and they know how to manipulate the mind. So you also need to see that fear can be easily manipulated. It can be tricked, because the simple reason that the mind can be tricked. And let me give you a few more examples. Now, think of life before Google Maps came, right? Before all these apps on Google Maps, or navigation, we used to drive from place to place. And sometimes one person says, okay, this is the easiest path, let's take this road. But some would say, no, this is the other road. But when you put it on Google Maps, you see that both of them are wrong, that there's a different road. But again, go back to the life before Google Maps, you felt one road was the closest. Even if it wasn't the closest on Google Maps, you still felt that it's the closest road. So mind perceives things quite differently. And let me also try to draw a connection between how our mind works. If you start plotting the information that you receive, versus the perception you have, right? So when I say perception, let's say that you did not have any idea or any feeling about that particular information, but more and more information you are fed with, this could go up, right? So there's a link, or there's a correlation that we could draw between the amount of information you get and the perception which will be there of a person. And we also know that we can manipulate that feeling, we can manipulate the information, hence we can manipulate the feeling or the perception. So when I say perception, it includes fear, but it includes everything else other than fear. But since we are discussing about fear, let's take fear here. So fear can be manipulated easily, and it doesn't necessarily have to be statistical or rational. And that you will also see that take a simple office setting, right? So there's two employees and one manager. So the two employees, they do the same sort of wrongful thing. So they do a mistake. Both of them are equally wrong, but somehow one person goes and tells it to the manager, and several other people who are not at the office, who are the stakeholders, they also go and complain the manager about a particular person. And what would the manager be thinking now? Manager would be thinking, although it looks like both of them were involved in this wrongdoing, I don't like this one guy particularly because I have been hearing a lot of bad news about him. So you see that sometimes this happens in our daily life. Take if you're working in a store or a brand, that you will see customer complaints. Sometimes, or even payment to creditors, especially now that a lot of people are tied up with money, that a lot of people are asking, the creditors are asking for money. And sometimes you see that you have to pay 1 million to one person who doesn't bother you very much, but you have to pay 10,000 to another person who calls you every day. So in your mind, you'll be more afraid, or more, let's say, the feeling that you have about the particular creditor who's asking you every day would be bigger than the creditor whom you have to pay 1 million, right? Regardless of the fact that it's 1 million or 10,000, it's the amount of feeling that you have or the perception that you have developed, hence the fear that you have developed. So bad mouthing, praising can happen at office setups with this manipulation. You know that. And perception, again, is not reality, but this particular perception of fear. Now, we already told that that fear or perception is somewhat related to information. But I would like to suggest you that it's not really information, because information is out there. It's about how much you believe that information, right? So you could start believing something even if it's totally not true, but there's a particular piece of information that you found somewhere, and then you start believing it. But there might be information out there which are facts where you don't look at it. You particularly get bonded with a particular information, and then you start believing in it. And more you believe, more you will be afraid. Now, again, don't misunderstand me. I'm not talking about the real risk. Let's assume for a moment that there's a real risk, or a calculated risk, or the real risk that it poses on you. I'm not talking about that. I'm trying to want you to reflect on the perception of fear that you have in your mind. So this is all about the perception you have in your mind. So fear, although we said that it's to do with knowledge, it's a little beyond knowledge. It's about believing that particular information. And then there's also the other phenomena that we are more afraid of unknown fears than known fears. So with that, let's look into more aspects of the fears we have. You will also see that some of the fears are more intrinsic, they are more innate compared to some of the fears which are acquired. Now, what do I mean by that? If you expose a kid to the sensation of falling, or a loud noise, even without that kid who's an infant, even if he hasn't learned anything culturally, he or she would still be affected by that. He or she would be afraid of that, the sensation of falling or sensation of a loud noise. And if you ask generally, most of the time, people are afraid of few things. People are really afraid of death, regardless of the culture, regardless of what exposure you have. You're afraid of your death, and then you're also afraid of things like snakes throughout. even if you expose a different type of an animal, there's this some you see that there's some biological fear and embedded fear towards snakes. So some of the fears are, of course, you can say very easily that they are culturally acquired. Let's take the example for example, let's say a particular food. Now, if I'm a devoted Muslim or if I'm a devoted Jew, I would have a rejection towards eating pork. It could come as a fear that is pork mixed into my food when I'm eating at this particular restaurant. And if you're a Hindu or if you're a Buddhist, you would also have this same type of a fear towards beef. Is beef mixed into my vegan diet? So you could say that that factor of you being afraid of a particular meat is quite culturally acquired. But things like your death, that is probably there is probably a cultural component where in certain cultures you are more afraid of death than certain other cultures. But generally speaking, it seems that there are certain intrinsic fears, that there are innate fears, and there's a lot of acquired fears. And if you look at a person, you would find more acquired fears, and depending on the culture you live, depending on the people that you get exposed to, your fears will also be unique according to that. Even they say that your personality is very much similar to or is a reflection of the people or the seven most closest personalities that you associate, or the seven best friends that you have. But when you say best, again, remember that your mind need to be believing in it. Information alone doesn't make much of a difference, but when you take the information serious, when you start believing in it, it really does make a difference. And I was showing you these images earlier of a couple of movies that you find. And I remember watching this movie called The Final Destination, where there's a lot of accidents. And since that, whenever I have to ride a roller coaster, that would come to my mind, right? And fear of clowns. Now, there's a particular movie, a few movies called, or a Stephen King book called It, which made people so afraid of clown for no apparent reason, uh, right? So it's not even a life and death situation like a tsunami or like a snake coming and biting you. Clowns. So just the fact of seeing a clown would makes you afraid, and it could even lead to a phobia. Some people are really afraid. So and another thing that you would also see relating back to the previous discussions that we had when you watch a horror movie is not all about these particular culturally acquired or innate fears you have. They are about the setup. Now, for a horror movie to become a horror movie, you need to listen to it with the soundtrack, right? And if you also watch it at night and turned off your lights a little, the feeling of horror would be more, right? You see that. But I'm again trying to show to you that how the mind, or the fact that the feeling of fear, how it can be manipulated using different components. Try watching a uh, try watching a movie with the soundtrack off. Try watching a horror movie with the soundtrack off. You would find that it's not so horror, right? And then you also see that there's this thing with the movies. They say that people are in general afraid of a few things like cats. When I say cats, like lions, tigers, snakes, birds, fire. And if you take most of the movies, you see a hero. Now, this particular hero will usually, depending on the genre, would kill a dragon. Now, what does a dragon represent? Dragon represent everything that a person could be afraid of. A cat, a snake, a bird who can fly, and fire, right? So you see that like marketeers, movie makers also understand knowingly, consciously or unconsciously, they understand how our psyche works. They understand how our mind works. So they use these fears when they want to create fear, make a horror movie. They use these fears, make use of it, and show it to you. And another factor with fear that you might see, that fear is quite contagious, right? We have this uh, ability, or the phenomena of that we can mimic, or we can empathize with people. So when we see someone yawning in front of us, we also start yawning automatically. I have seen it many times. And when you see that someone is smiling in front of you, you also feel like you're smiling. And if someone is sad, you're also sad. So when someone is afraid, when someone has a fear, that fear can get absorbed by the people around you. So you see that a parent who's very much or a caretaker who's afraid of something can give it to the child that you're taking care of, and the fear in that way is quite contagious. Not only fear, any emotion is quite contagious. You can another person can empathize with you, so you can get someone else's feeling. Now I want you to look at it in another way. If you wish not to be afraid, let's say that you don't want to be afraid of a ghost, how do you do that? There's two things that you could do. You can be more powerful than the goat, right? You can be more powerful than the goat, and you can not be afraid of the goat. That's one way. And you can also start loving the ghost, like in the famous story Beauty and the Beast, right? When you love the ghost, you don't feel so afraid. Now I want you to look at these factors. Sometimes fear has a counterweight, which is compulsion that we were talking about during the last weeks. Let's take an example. Let's say that someone is an unknown person, a neighbor who has moved into your block, is quarantined with COVID. He's positive with COVID and he's on quarantine. And there's another family member of yours, your loved one, he's also in quarantine. Now, when you pass by the room of these two particular people, you would see that you are more afraid of the unknown patient versus your family member. Now, why is that? Also, that you might see sometimes if you have, when you go out somewhere and when you have to somehow use someone else's towel, you will feel comfortable to use your family member's towel than someone else who's unknown to you. Now, it again does not reflect on the facts. For example, that unknown person might be more hygienic than your own family member, but you still feel comfortable using that towel of a family member. So you see that compulsion, uh, it takes you down in one way, and the fear affects you in another way. So they are sort of pulling you from two different paths. You see this thing again in movies, that there's one guy on the left and one guy on the right. They're advising about what to do. So fear and compulsion, although I put these two things together, it can be the you having a desire to something and your own mind restrictions. You could say again that it's a form of fear, but here I'm talking about fears sort of related to COVID. So fear and compulsion are in the two sides. In fact, that if you look at Buddhist literature, you find this beautiful story. Buddha performed a twin miracle. It was called Yamaka Pratiharya. Now, a twin miracle, as per the story, says that Buddha, at the same time, from one side, from one hand, he projects water, and from the other hand, he projects fire. Again, I don't know how humanly possible it is, but if you look at the meaning behind it or the idea behind it, I don't know if Buddha has really done it or not, but regardless of the fact that if you look at it, every person is always a combination of two things. From one end, he's getting pushed by the fear or pulled by the fear, and from the other end, he's getting uh, lured into the compulsion or the desire. So we have this innate nature of a conflict. Our mind is always in a conflict, and more the conflict you have, more stressed out you will become, right? Now again, time to time, mind tries to compensate to that and try to rationalize it. Now, rationalize is the sort of healing mechanism mind has. So when there's a fear, you start looking at the risk versus reward. Or in finance, you would look at a cost-benefit analysis or return on the investment. I know smoking is bad, but the amount of pleasure I get is a reward. So you weigh the options, pros and cons, right? Even throughout your daily lives, you weigh the pros and cons. Should I drink tea? These are the pros. Should I drink coffee? These are the pros and the cons. So you do a bit of rationalization inside your mind, and due to the fact that we have this two sides in our mind. We are always stressed in between. Now, if you look at the fears you have, there's many fears: fear of rejection, fear of failure, fear of unknown, fear of wanting to survive. Now, if you look at all these things, you would see that these fears, or let's say in broader terms, survival, you want to maintain a particular place, right? You want to survive. And why is survival so important? What if I say survival is so important because you're so attached to survival? You have given a value to survival. Now, when I say survival, let's take that the fear is fear of rejection, and your survival is not getting rejected. So you have this frame or a box saying that I should not get rejected, right? So we are attracted, we are attached to the idea that we should not get rejected. And if you look at all the most of the time that you see that the survival or maintaining the value that we have given is for an ideal situation, that we need to have X amount of money, we need to have a particular job, we need to have a particular social level, our kids need to be in a particular way. You will also see that these things are really ideas you have or concepts you have in your mind, right? All these ideal situations, they are your thinking. If you ask your friend, well, sometimes the same group of birds flock together. So similar people would have similar concepts, similar ideas. But if you randomly ask 100 people around the world, that each person would have a different ideal situation than the other person. So you see that values that we give are really sitting in our mind, which are really concepts. We have given a lot of value to our concepts that we hold, ideas we hold, or you could even say beliefs we hold. And it's almost as if you're trying to flee a fear, it's almost as if you're trying to run away from your own shadow, right? You can try running away from your shadow, but the shadow will never leave you. Shadow is so faithful, it would never leave you. So why can't we, why did I come up with that metaphor? Is that you see that fear, again, don't misunderstand me. I'm not talking about the actual fear or the statistical fear or the real fear which it poses, but the fear that you have in mind as a perception. Now, that is a projection of your own shadow, right? You are afraid of certain things. You have given value to certain ideal situations. And because you have given that value to the particular ideal situation, losing that would make you upset. In other words, you would not want to leave that place where you're mostly comfortable with. Having said that, let me bring the term the comfort zone. Now, each one of us have our zone where we feel most comfortable. If you are a kid, it's a crib or the arms of your mother. And if you are a teenager, it's a school or it's the house. If you are an employee, it's the office. It's not someone else's office, it's your office. So you have a domain and you have a zone where you are comfortable. Even animals have it. So you see that when a little chick, when a little pullet is born or a chick is born, the bird nest, we have a bird nest up here. You can see that the bird mother, would sort of give a gentle shove to the bird. So it would fall off the tree or fall off the nest, and it would start spreading the wings and flying. Now, why do they do that? The bird mom knows that this kid is in a particular comfort zone, and if you don't give that little extra push, they would never leave, right? And I want you to reflect or draw a parallel to the mind fears. Now, our mind also sits on a comfort zone, and we are afraid. Our fear is actually the rejection to step outside that comfort zone, right? And you will again see that this comfort zone is most of the time not much to do with the physical presence of it, but it's really a mental presence. uh, so the comfort zone is really more mental than physical, right? And with the comfort zones, with having a comfort zones, there's also this fact that in a comfort zone, things are more under control. Things are more certain. That's what you like about a comfort zone. You don't have to put a lot of energy. It's really under our control, right? If you try to move from one zone or the comfort zone to outside, you will find that here it's very certain. I know what's happening here. I know how to manipulate it. I know how to control. But outside my comfort zone, I really don't know. Now that's the same fear when you have to leave a job or when you migrate to a different country. You are more uncertain. But having said that, again, let me again tell you, even though we have the fear, there's sometimes also the desire or the compulsion, right? It's dragging you from one end, and the fear is holding you down from another end. Uh, so you need to understand both sides of mind without looking at it unilateral. So talking about fear, you see that within this zone of comfortness, things are more certain. There's a certainty. You know how it works. It can be controlled. You know the parameters. There's control over that. Outside the comfort zone, there's less control. So I want you to look at this fact again. Is it really less control, or do you think there's no control, or you think there's no certainty there? Let's leave it that for a moment. And you would also see that moving from one comfort zone to another non-comfort zone or outside the comfort zone it requires you to deal with emotions that you are previously unknown to, right? You're known to certain feelings, and last week we said our feelings are quite habitual, right? We don't need to think, it's quite habitual. But so when you move into a new zone, outside your comfort zone, you need to get used to these high emotions or uh, un, untrained emotions, new emotions. Now that requires a lot of mind work. Uh, it requires a lot of effort from your mind, from moving from a habitual activity or a habitual thought process to a non-habitual thought process. And you will also see that one thing which gives us certainty is that we feel that there's continuity, there's continuation. For example, the place here where you sit every day, there's a particular spot for every person in the family. So when you sit at that particular spot, you know that that chair has been here yesterday. It will be there most likely tomorrow, and it is here right now. So you feel that there's a continuity of things. In fact, you like continuous things more than non-continuous things. Now, there's a very deep concept in Buddhism called anicca, dukkha, anatta, right? Grossly translating, anicca could mean the uncertainty. If you look at the direct translation, it will be impermanence, but there's so many ways that you could interpret the same thing. Uncertainty, the nature's uncertainty. So now that's a critical factor of why you would not step outside of a comfort zone. And dukkha, dukkha generally means the suffering, but I would like to look at it this way. Dukkha could mean any emotion which is quite heavy. Now, fear can be heavy, anger can be heavy, lust or eagerness, desire can also be heavy. Happiness can also be heavy sometimes. Of course, you see that the negative emotions are, it seems to be more heavier. But if you forget that heaviness and if you move into a zone of lightness or positive side, you would also see that within that positive side, there's also a heaviness, right? So anatta means or anatma means that there's a continuous nature. For example, the literal anatma meaning is that you have a soul which is in continuation. So we like to see things, or we are more comfortable in things when it's more continuous. When it was here yesterday, it was here 5 years ago, and it will be here 5 years later. So when things are in continuity, you feel comfortable. And with the same thing, I would also like you to show a little experiment. So there's this behavioral psychologist called B.F. Skinner. He carried out a fantastic experiment to show you a particular behavior. Now, when we say behavior, we of course know that behavior is a reflection of how your mind works. So he has taken a pigeon and he has carried out this experiment called the pigeon's superstition experiment. Now, what you do is you cage a pigeon in a box where you can see the pigeon from one end, and there's a mechanically working door on one side. And there's also a mechanism when the pigeon pecks on that. when the pigeon presses that button, the door would open, and that door would lead to pigeon can't go out. He can put his head out, and it can find food outside that door, particular small opening. So this opening is mechanically controlled. Whenever you press the button, it would open and it would automatically close in 5 seconds. So during that 5 seconds, the pigeon can go and eat. So the pigeon easily figured out that when you press that, the door opens. What Skinner did next was the more interesting part. He made this adjustment to the experiment. He added another device. Even if the pigeon did not press the button, even if he doesn't press the button, he made a device so that the door would be open. So initially when it happened, pigeon was surprised. I'm just thinking the same way that a pigeon would think. The pigeon might have thought, what opened this door? What did I deserve so that the door got open, right? So the pigeon must have been thinking, what caused the opening of the door? Was I really deserving that much? So he didn't know. And a few moments later, pigeon started developing or correlating a particular activity that he was doing with this opening of the door. So initially he knew that when you press the button, the door would open. But now the door automatically opens and closes down after 5 seconds. So pigeon, let's say that he was turning in circles in a clockwise manner. He thought turning in clockwise would open the door, and then he started sticking to that. Right now, I want to give out two things out of this experiment. One thing is that sometimes you started believing in certain things even if it's not the case. A classic example is science. Now, although people say science is different to religion, I would like to say science is a religion too. It's Scientology. People do believe in religion, and the same way you believe in religion, you also believe in science. One could say that there's a different utilitarian value, but again, it's a matter of how you look at utility, right? Are you looking at utility in terms of the work done or the money collected, or are you looking at the utility in terms of the peace of mind you have? So it totally depends. So let's say science is also a belief system, and having learned science a lot, even postgraduate level, I know that science also operates on basic axioms. In order for you to say 1 plus 1 is 2, you really need to believe that that particular plus mark adds things up. If you don't believe in it, you can't do the math. So you see that when initially Newton proposed the Newtonian physics, where things fall off from place to place and there's attraction, Einstein came and he sort of said it's not the case. So you see, within science, it changes all the time, so we can observe. And what I want you to understand is that similarly, whenever things happen, whenever we get emotions, we also have a theory behind it. And what you need to understand is it's perfectly okay to use this theory for your peace of mind. If it helps you, use it. If it gets work done, do it. But don't get too attached to that particular uh, idea. Now, that is one side of the story. And then the other side of the story is that this particular pigeon, right? We are talking about this particular pigeon. Now, although this pigeon opened the door, the act of him pressing the button, did that open the door? I'm asking you a question that even though we think the pigeon pecked on the button and he pressed the button and opened the door, is that the single thing which opened the door? I would like you to look at it from a different perspective. Now the pigeon can be hungry, it can press the button, but had B.F. Skinner not designed this particular experiment, would there be a button to be opened? Right? So you see that sometimes things have a causality. There are previous activity which has happened. If B.F. Skinner never took behavioral psychology under his interest, would we ever see a experiment, or would I even talk about this particular experiment to this audience, right? There are so many links that would have changed, and this particular activity might not have happened. Think of the particular clothes that you are wearing right now. Early in the morning, you randomly selected clothes. Now it looks as a total random activity. But are we really randomly selecting, or is it caused by some action before? So if you look at it that way, why I said that with the pigeons experiment is that sometimes you can formulate theories, you can theorize, or you can even say they are superstitions. because they doesn't necessarily have to be true. But then you start believing in it. So you have beliefs. It might not necessarily explain it in the absolute realness, but it would give you a temporary satisfaction, peace of mind, might get your work done, but might not be the case. Classic example, even though we don't fully accept Newtonian physics, all the work done, the vehicles move, the lights, the dynamos, they work on Newtonian physics. So similarly, our fears, right? With the pigeons experiment, we saw that these theories we have, it might not be so wise to be too attached to them. We need to make use of it, but maybe not too attached to them. And the other factor is that although we think that it's like a random activity, there could be somewhat of a causality, right? There could be somewhat of a causality. So what I really want to ask you is that within your comfort zone, you had a certain certainty, a control. Now, is this really a control, or is it an illusion of control? What does that mean? What is truly under your control? Is your mind under your control? Can you think of anything right now? Of course, yes, you can think of many things, but can you think of anything? Last few weeks we were talking that although we can think of things, it is bound by certain limitations, and it's bound by certain habits. Can you control your body? Uh, of course, if you want to move your glass of water from one place to the other, you can do it. There are certain times that you can do it, but there can be certain times where you can't do it, right? When you have if you're paralyzed, you can't simply do it. So 50% of the time you see that it can work, and 50% of the time it cannot work. Take anything. Can you control? Do you have control over the soul? Do you have control over your karma? Do you have control over your god? Do you have control over the physics? Where do you have control? So with the pigeons experiment, I was trying to draw your mind that although we think that pigeon thought that there is a control in his experiment, there might not be a control. Maybe it's sort of deterministic based on the previous action. Now, this is a classic old conversation or a debate between many philosophers. Does the world really have a free will, or is it deterministic? Is everything on a set path, or is there a free will? Now, this is a classic argument, but I don't want to argue, or I don't want your mind to argue inside whether the world is deterministic. Is there a set path which is based on your causality, or do we have a free will to do things? Now, if you look at it rationally, it seems that things are predetermined, but your feeling is quite counterintuitive. You always feel that you can do something. So I don't want you to get into this trap of this age-old discussion between if there's a free will or a deterministic nature in the universe. What I want you to draw is that regardless of determined, regardless of its free will, it's a 50-50 chance. 50% of the time it's probably deterministic. 50% of the time it is non-deterministic. It's your free will. But the more important question is not if it's a deterministic nature or if it's a free nature. Do you really know which 50% is which? Are you certain about that? Although you theorize, although you have theories explaining that, are you sure which 50% is deterministic and which 50% is non-deterministic? There's a theory called skepticism. Uh, from Rig Veda, from Buddhist literature, you find this idea all the time. Uncertainty of quantum, right? You even see the quantum uncertainty right now. So you see that uncertainty is part and parcel of this nature. We tend to believe that this is really under control. It probably is under control 50% of the time. It is probably not. But regardless of that, you think that it is certain, or you think this is uncertain. It could be uncertain 50% of the time. It could be not uncertain 50% of the time. So regardless of that, you believe that it's uncertain. So I want to look at it from a different view from today, that nature has this uncertainty within embedded. But we do not want to accept that uncertainty. We want to accept the certainty. So that's why we want to stay in that comfort zone where it makes our life in control, makes us feel safe. So Is it really feeling safe, or is it an actual safeness? Is it a statistically calculated risk, or is it a perception of fear? So I want you to look at it that way also. Now, truth of the world is that there's no assurance. At the same time, there is control. It's quite contradicting. Sometimes there is control, sometimes it's totally uncontrollable. There's no assurance. Or you could say there's no ultimate control. Now, what would you do now? Would you look at your fear the same way, or would you start looking at the fear somewhat differently? Now, I will show you a quick image that suppose that you go to sleep today and you have to wake up early morning tomorrow, and when you are woken up, you wake up into this setting. You wake up on board an alien ship, or in a hell, let's say. You'll be really afraid. You'll be so afraid that I woke up in a hell, and it's not my comfort zone. But if you wake up to your own cozy bed surrounding your family members, you would not be so upset, right? Now, why I gave you this metaphor is that sleeping and waking up to an unknown setting, which is uh, fear, which generates fear, or waking up to a setting which is comfortable. What I want you to equate this to is that our mind sometimes wake up to feelings. Now, when I say waking up to feelings, you suddenly get aware of a feeling that I am sad, or I am afraid, or I'm hungry, right? You get a feeling and you get aware to that. And when you become aware to a feeling, that feeling, if it's completely unknown to you, you would start panicking. There's an element of surprise, right? Now, when I said in the metaphor that you will be afraid, that afraidness is true for the positive feelings and negative feelings both, right? If something needs to be big in nature, if a feeling needs to be big in nature, it has to have this element of surprise. Let's say that you go from work to home, and your fiance or your loved one has made a beautiful dinner table and treats you so beautiful, so well. Now that surprises you, and that piece of surprise give you that nice high emotion. At the same time, you go after you return home after work, and you see that your uh, house is wrecked totally. That is also surprising in a negative manner. So this amount of surprise correlate to the amount of the fear, or the amplitude of the fear, the size of the fear, or size of the emotion, right? Now, when you wake up to something unknown, you are afraid, like when you wake up in the alien ship. And if you wake up into something known, you are not so afraid. So more you know, more you understand about your mind, less possibility that you will wake up to a bad dream, right? So I want you to again leave a message. Without tackling COVID related fears, first thing we need to look at is how do we understand our mind? How do we understand the different ways of our mind? But again, when we say understanding, don't get into the same habit of that pigeon of theorizing it, because you could be wrong sometimes. It can be a superstition, like the pigeon came up with that theory. So don't try to theorize your mind, just observe your mind, right? And with that, I will have a summary of what we discussed today. We discussed that fear and risk are not necessarily the same thing. Risk is more statistically calculatable, but fear is a perception. And the problem with this fear, or the perception of fear, is that it can be affected by using of information. And problem with the information, that the information can be manipulated, because the mind can be tricked. If there's time, I can tell you 100,000 ways where mind can be tricked, right? It can be tricked by others, or you yourself can be tricked, right? Now I talk as if you are different to the mind. Let's resolve that later, but for the moment, let's say that there's mind and there's you, and yourself, unknowing to you, mind can trick you, right? Others can also trick you, like the marketeers, like the politicians, right? When they want to spread a particular message, they can trick you into believing what they want with an agenda. So with the mind of this fear, you see that fear also has limitations, right? Fear is sometimes countered by desire. It can be counted. And because of this fear, we tend to create a zone where we are not afraid of. That is the area where you don't have, the fear does not exist. That is your comfort zone. And what is important in this comfort zone, I'm talking about not a physical comfort zone, a zone inside your mind. Within this comfort zone, you are comfortable. You have things under control there. You're truly under control there. And when you see what is under control, that you will see that these are own mind fabricated ideas that you have inside your mind. Those concepts, those beliefs, they are inside your mind sitting, and you think that you can control them. And because of the feeling that you have, you can control them, you tend to feel more comfortable in it, and you don't want to step outside that zone of comfort unless there's a big reward, right? Unless if there's a big reward. Now, that is the reality. And although we have theorized, like Newton has theorized, few 100 years later, 50 years later, you will see my theory is totally wrong. So inside our mind, we have these concepts, and we have the equation. We have the theory saying, if this happens, this should happen. Because I do believe in that theory, and it's certain in my mind. But again, I want you to understand, although we say things that I'm certain about it, are you really certain about things? Is universe, mind, body, soul, karma, God, physics, are they certain in nature, or there's a doubtfulness, or there's a element of uncertainty? Now, element of uncertainty is like 1%, or is it like 50-50? So I want you to openly know these things without theorizing your mind. And more importantly, now we have been discussing about COVID-related, compulsion-related factors, not in a judgmental manner, but more in a manner that you understand your mind. We also discussed that how COVID can affect your fear side. But now, having said that, now you understood this properly. I mean, this is not rocket science. You understand it. Everything I said, you already knew it by now. But the more important thing is, will there be a transformation within you, even though I say it? So understanding is one thing, having a knowledge about is one thing, but would it really make a difference in you? Would you start looking at fear from a different angle now? Would you be reacting to fear from a different pattern now? Will you be more mindful about these fears, desires, compulsions that you have inside your mind? Again, don't misunderstand what I said. Now, suppose that if you have lost the job, right, and if you don't have income, you definitely need to find an income. There are certain things that you have to do in order to do that. But more importantly, while trying to find that extra income, you can be sad, or you can be stressed, and you can be quite down, depressed. Now, what I want you to understand is that my purpose of me saying these things was that instead of getting reacting with depression, reacting with the frustration, irritation, anger, I want you to look at it from a different perspective. That for you to feel depressed, there was a path. It happened due to certain things, and we know why, because we understand our mind. And it doesn't mean that you should stop looking for a job, or you should totally give up on looking at a job. But what I'm saying is that whatever you need to do physically, whatever you need to do in the real world, you need to do in the real world, grounded in the real world, right? But you also need to have another eye open. It's like a third eye opening. Apart from the two eyes you have where you look outside, you have a third eye which is more inward. You light up this third eye and try to see, is there a different perspective to this? Whatever the feeling that I'm feeling, is it worth feeling it? Of course, if it's worth feeling it, feel it. But if it's not worth feeling it, what caused this feeling? Now, there was a particular way: information, habit, fear, comfort zone, certainty that I believe which exists within that comfort zone. Now, all this contributed to this fear I have. So, should I live with that particular hard feeling, that heavy emotion, or can I just opt to not live with it? and it does not affect whatever I do. My motivations will be the same. Whatever I do will be the same. It would not imbalance your life. So it is very, very important again to understand this. I see that a lot of people who go on a path of spirituality, or at least would like to be thinking that they are in a path of spirituality, right? Like you believe that you are in control, or you are in an illusion of thinking that you're in a control. A lot of people think that they are in a path of spirituality, right? And these type of people, I see that they don't have a balance in their life. They ruin one aspect of life, thinking of the mind. Now everything is fabrication of mind, so I should forego, let go. Everything happens outside. So that's not the message I want to give to you. I want you to have a more balanced approach to life. If you're riding a bicycle, you can't be too lean to the right or too lean for the left. You need to have a balance in your life. So similarly, look both ways, right? And try to understand the emotions that you have been holding on to so much. Is it really worth holding on to that? Why did you held to that, thinking it is certain that there is a continuity, right? But is there really a continuity, or is there a different proposition, or is it really certain? Although you think it's certain, is it really certain? So with that message, I would like to end the discussion today. Sabbe satta bhavantu sukhitatta. May all beings find their existential bliss.